So yeah, so this is my obsession with my 22-inch. And I thought I'd start, I mean, that's obviously me with the start of it, right? When I got it in the kitchen and started to put it together, but it actually starts a bit of a time ago, and Bob will remember this one because Bob's in the picture, or I think, or am I in the picture? I can't remember. I think you're in the picture.
No, you're in the picture. I'm taking the picture.
Me? Oh, you're taking the picture. So this is back many years ago, around 2005, and my first obsession with at least aperture fever was this 16-inch. So that was my second telescope. I went from a 5-inch to a 16-inch, and I had it for some time, right? And then realised it had mirror flop, and it was a 16-inch Meade, and you couldn't apply one flat to the next thing because it would have moved in between. And anyway, but it was good fun, and it was great. It was a great visual instrument, right? So which was really good. So I've always been sort of looking at getting a larger telescope when I got rid of this one. And up until recently, my largest was 12-inch, but I didn't want something to image with. I just wanted something to do visual, because I'm one of these split personality people where I'm actually just not an astrophotographer. Some people know me as an astrophotographer. Some people know me because I do a lot of travel. And then some people know me because I actually think Dave does lots of visual stuff. So, you know, I had a big set of binoculars and I wanted to get back into visual, and I'd been over to Kelling Heath and used a couple of the large Dobsonians over there. And then I think that just made my mind up, and I said, right, okay, I need to get one of these, right? And so I went off to find one. Now I did settle on one, which was from Obsession in the US. And the reason for that is, if you want a large aperture telescope, and I'm talking anything more than about 16 inches, in the UK, you have to make it yourself, or you have to very expensively import it from somewhere, right? Those are the two options, right? The third option is you buy one secondhand, which doesn't come up very often, right? But those are really the options that you have. And I said, well, most people know I'm time poor, so I don't have enough time to build one. Or probably the skill to do that. So instead, I thought, do you know what? I'll have a look around and see if I can find one used. Couldn't find one used. Couldn't find one that had ever been sold used, especially in Obsession. And I'd used 2 Obsessions at the Star Party. So I thought, right, okay, I deserve a treat. I'll go and buy one. So I did. So I went online. I got in touch with Dave Kriege back at the beginning of last year, and I put in an order for the 22-inch ultra compact. And the reason I went for that over a 25 is the 25 that they do isn't an ultra compact. Anyone knows me, they know I'm not the tallest of people. I am literally the average height for a girl. So being that stature, actually having anything taller than a couple of steps on a ladder was going to cause me a problem, right? So the 22-inch comes in a nice round, just over 2 meters at the zenith, which is quite good. So just because people like specifications and statistics, it is a 22-inch mirror. They insource or outsource that mirror and bring it in. It is 2 inches thick, and I can tell you, the mirror itself, when it came out of the box, is a 2-person lift, right? So it isn't a light thing at all, although it is a light thing, if you pardon the pun. The secondaries around about 3.5 inches. It is supposedly a very good scope, and I'll show you one of the. They give you a report, as they do with a lot of the scopes these days, on the mirror quality. So it's got a very good Strel rating as well. But more importantly for me, is it is lightweight in parts and it's compact, right? So that was key for me. And then the other key thing for me is I didn't want to fix anything. And most people also know me because I don't want to fix something. I'd rather buy my way out of a problem, right? Because again, I don't have enough time just because of my work. So I thought, well, if I buy this one, it's already had all the fixes done to it. And indeed, they've even put on galvanized steel on everything now for all the parts, whereas Owen Brazell, who had one of the earlier ones, complained about rust because, sorry, it was stainless steel. Stainless steel is, they weren't using it back, 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I'm pleased to say they've now fixed that. So that's the spec of the little Dob, and so I had to go and pick it up. So off we went in my Land Rover Discovery, and this is the back of the Land Rover Discovery with the small amount of boxes down in, right? And this guy came over because we picked it up from I think it was T5, and it came over on a pallet, and then the guy, this big hefty guy, who was much bigger than my telescope, I'm sure, actually just started picking these boxes up and just chucking them in the back of my car. We had to take a bunch of stuff out of one of the boxes because it wouldn't fit. But this is the seats down. And if anyone knows a Discovery, they're quite large in terms of their volume, and we couldn't really fit them all in. And this is now pressing on the ceiling. I still have a nice little indentation on the ceiling of my nice new Discovery from these boxes, right? So this was probably the biggest toy I'd bought for a very long time. So come back home, following day, couldn't wait, right, going to get it all out. My lovely wife put up with me with boxes and packaging and bits and pieces strewn around various different rooms in the kitchen and the hallway, the snug, the lounge, the dining room, all sorts of places, right? There was an enormous amount of unpacking, and I would say one thing. So this had come from the US. It was flown over by Virgin Atlantic. So once it shipped, it really came the next day, and I was ready to go and collect it, which was great. None of this putting it on the ship and you don't know where it is. And it was so well packaged. I was really impressed, right? So these are, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, these bags are really expanding foam bags that have been molded to the shape of the different pieces of the telescope as it's been packaged up. So well done on Obsession for shipping a product across the Atlantic. So this was the mirror box, right? And this is an enormous box, and you'll see it's a box inside a box inside a box, and you can see it says, for those who are probably before metric, it's 70 pounds. If anyone can tell me what that is in kilograms. But it's definitely a heavy box. So it took 2 of us to get it into the place where we could unpack it. And if you open that up, you can see they started to use things like polystyrene that were in there, and then hidden underneath the polystyrene was actually some insulation. So that's really handy because that's going in my loft. So I was quite pleased about that. Some extra insulation I can repurpose and reuse. And then inside of that was another box, and inside of that box was another box. And you can see that's now got some other packaging around it. And this is to say just the mirror, right? So this is really well packaged, right? And you really want to make sure that obviously it is. It's, as I said, 2 inches thick. So actually it's a good thing to have it packaged so well. If we dive down into that box and we put that on the ground, and I did sort of a grand opening. So as I was doing this, I was taking photos of everything I was doing so I could remember what I had and how it was all packaged up, right? So if you open all of that up inside that massive box that we've sort of decanted all the wrapping on, you land up with this mirror inside, which then has layer upon layer upon layer of tissue paper on it, right? Really nicely taped up. And just in there in the center is the serial number. I think we get a shot of that in a minute. And I've now lifted that out, and that is a really heavy weight on my leg. And you can see the tissue paper covering the whole of the mirror cell. So it's a really good, as I say, packaging exercise. And there's the little serial number. And that's handy because later on you then see that the serial number is imprinted on the mirror itself. It's also the serial number you get in all the documentation, so you know you've got the right mirror for the instrument that you've ordered. This was me then taking all of the tissue paper off, and you can see, apart from the reflection of my ceiling, there is a little dot in the middle, which is fantastic. So that's very handy, and some indentations on the side, some sort of up to the top left, top right, and the bottom of just where they've put the coating on, and there were some bits that were left. So that's quite normal, I've been told, which is good. But a very clean mirror, and there is the serial number on the side, just in case you forget or you sell it on and they want to know what the serial number is and go back to Obsession and understand what's the of this this mirror itself. So the first thing you do when you've unboxed that and you've started to unbox the rest of this stuff is you look at the instruction manual. So I did read the instruction manual because it was quite important. I wanted to get this right. And you have to apply this really expensive piece of tape, which at the end of the day is just Velcro. And you apply that to the mirror because what you then want to do is put a piece of wire around the whole mirror itself. And that wire is going to hold that mirror in, right? So that is really the only thing that this piece of steel wire that holds that mirror in. So what you then do is you put another piece of Velcro over the top of that, and that forms the bond with the mirror. And believe it or not, that is enough with the weight of that mirror to hold it in the cell and in the mirror cell itself when you put the mirror in. And you'll see in a minute how that works. So this is the mirror cell itself. And you can see they've used 6 plates. And again, you know, this is Dave Kriege working on, you know, these types of telescopes for some 30, 35 years. And the ultra compact's been around for some time now. And this is the design that he settled on. And again, you know, I'm buying someone else's design, which is why these things cost a lot of money. And he's, you know, refined this over a period of time. Again, if I talk to Owen Brazell, some of the things in this design here are slightly different and problematic, whereas he's now fixed that on this. But you can see that wire around the edge that you actually land up then connecting and tightening around the mirror itself. They don't tell you that you need a 9/16 spanner. Now, if you probably are a youngster, you might not know what a 9/16 spanner is. You've probably got a load of metric spanners, in which case you've got to pop down to your local hardware store to go and get one, right? But fortunately, being the age I am, I do have a 9/16 spanner, and I needed that to tighten up some of the nuts that were there, which were included in the instruction to make sure I put these little pillars in place, which were then going to make sure that the mirror does, if the mirror falls out of that sling, it's got something nice and rubbery to hit. So it doesn't do any damage and it doesn't fall on the floor. This is the box, the rocker box on the bottom. So this is what that frame then sits on top. And you can see the nylon sort of white things that are on there so it moves smoothly. And by the way, in use, it is beautifully smooth to move this telescope. It really is a joy to use one finger and just move it about, right? So they've done a really good job. Now, this is, I'm going to say ply, actually. It's painted. So the one recommendation is, if you want, and given the country we live in, I'm going to give that a good coat with a bit of cupanol just to make sure it's waterproofed as well, right? So we don't get any moisture sitting on there. And then now you can see both of them next to each other. So the mirror will sit in that rocker mirror cell, and that will then sit in the box opposite. And one of the design changes is you see that rocker itself and those two sort of circular pieces, curves of I'm going to call they're, in fact, they are metal, along with being a ply. They, in the old design, were split halfway down, so you could then fold them up and then put it in your car. That caused enormous problems, and the hinges came loose. You couldn't get collimation correctly, so he's just gone for a fixed design. Now, it does mean when you put it in a car, you've got to be careful that it fits, but I can tell you now that'll go in the back of most sort of I'm going to say mid-size saloon type cars with a boot, right? So that'll fit in there quite nicely. This is the top of the telescope that clearly holds the secondary mirror. And for scale, you can see my little 1979 Star Wars Nimnum figure sitting there. So that's just sitting at the top there next to the 4.0 UC logo. And that is a big beast, but you can actually pick it up, and it's not very heavy, and it's easy to move because you're going to do this and stripping it down every time you want to use it. this was a bit of a, I'm trying to work out what the heck it is. I looked at the label on it. It says, use this for draining your cylinder of water when you're doing plumbing. And I thought, right, that's very useful. So I sent a note to Dave Kriege and went, what's this for? And he went, that's your mirror cover. It just happens to be the right size for sitting on top of the shroud they give you. And it sits perfectly on top, doesn't touch the mirror, but it's the right size. So again, he's repurposed something from his local hardware store that's supposed to be used for plumbing, right? And then this is one of the most important things. This is the report on the mirror itself. So you can see there, the Stroll ratio, which is probably one of the more important figures that I've come to learn when buying telescopes, is 0.927. So it's a good mirror, right? This is not a bad mirror, and you get the wavefront and you get the infogram and a lot of other things that, unless you're very technical, you'd go, okay, that's very interesting. I'm sure it's probably going to be okay, right? So you get that, and you'll note again down in that bottom left-hand corner, optic description, it's got that serial number in there. So again, there's a map back to Dave Kriege and Obsession Telescopes that he runs from his home that says, this is obviously the specification of this particular and performance of this particular mirror. This is the secondary. So this is your 3.5-inch secondary that is like a big hand grenade eyepiece. It's about the same size of a big Teleview eyepiece. So that came nicely wrapped and packaged in lots of different things. Again, it has a serial number on it, right? So they say don't lose your serial number. So I've taken that sticker off and stuck it back on the side of the secondary itself. And when you take it out of its wrapping, it looks like this. So obviously it's a mirror slightly tilted. And then you can see there's a thread, which we're going to use in a minute just to pop that onto the top of the supports that make up the spider of the telescope itself. And it's got Bob's knobs on there, right, for adjusting, and it gives you a guide of how to do that. And there's a very good user guide that comes with it, actually. Another couple of bits of the telescope. These are the important shrouds. So the left one is the one that goes over the secondary at the top and hangs upside down. The one on the right loosely sits on top of the mirror. When I say loosely, it really is loosely. And then that lid, which I showed you earlier, which was for emptying your water tank onto, that then sits on top of this. So you'll see that again as we go forwards. No good Obsession telescope is good enough unless you get these couple of babies. So this is your wheelbarrow handles and wheels. And again, they screw in very nicely on the side of the rocker box and allow you to, once you've dismantled the main telescope truss itself, then wheelbarrow it with ease, I can tell you, from one place to another. So that now wheelbarrows into my workshop where it resides. These are the telescope poles, which came free with socks. I'd like to just announce they are clean socks that came from the US. I was very pleased with the clean socks. You could probably use them. I've tried one on and gone, yes, they fit, but I'm going to keep them on the end of my poles. There are differences with the poles, so you don't get mixed up. There are a couple of different types because one set of poles sits at one end of the mirror where it's a bit more difficult to access. So they've made the brackets a bit different. But again, they've really thought about, you're going to be using this all the time. You want to protect the ends of these threads of the nuts that go on and obviously the screws, and therefore putting the socks over the end was a really good solution, right? Not the most expensive solution given the price of the telescope, but it's just socks, right? Another box I got had a box of boxes. So what did I order? Well, I ordered a Teleview 13mm ethos eyepiece. They recommended about 4 different eyepieces. I had a 24mm panoptic anyway from Teleview, and then even for me, I didn't want to spend any more money, so I just said, oh, well, I'll just have the 13 and I'll put up with the 24, and we'll leave it there. Next to that box is something called a paracore. And the paracore is really there to help sort out coma and make sure that the eyepiece is put at the right distance and from the mirrors. and it is a must, right, for using on anything shorter than about f4.5. So this being f4.0, and the older one that Owen Brazell has was 4.2, means you do need to use a paracord, and you do need to set it differently depending on which lens, the eyepiece you put in, right? Below that is a laser collimator, and you'll see that in a little while, and that's really useful as well. So I got that with it. The inexpensive Telrad in the bottom box, and then the more expensive Argo Navis push to computer, right? So it doesn't do tracking, but it does push to. And without that, as Bob and I found out, you don't use the telescope, right? You point at the moon, probably that's it, and blind yourself. But apart from that, it's really difficult to use and star hop when, for most people, and I'm going to say even tall people, you're probably at least one step up a ladder to be able to look at something if it's at zenith, right? So that's sort of a must. The other thing that it comes with is a shroud, and this is a really beautifully made shroud. And again, over the years, he's used different material. So you get this very nicely made shroud that fits perfectly over the telescope itself. And it's got a really nice patch. That patch is about the size of my hand. So it's a nice patch that goes on there as well. And then you can work out which way round the shroud goes on based on the way the patch is sewn on. So that's what I worked out very quickly. If you stick it on the wrong way, and that's not up the right way at the right side of the telescope, then it doesn't work, right? And you'll see why it doesn't work when we get to how you attach the Argo Navis. So we pop the mirror into that cradle, and now you can see on the right-hand side a closer look at those sort of poles that I was using the 9/16 spanner to do up. And literally, if it were to fall out that sling, it would just gently, I've been told, bounce against 3 of these metal with rubber coated sort of pins that stick out, and just stop it from hitting the floor and ruining your day, and probably then causing an argument with your better half, because you probably need to get it replaced, right? Which would not be a good sign. There's a bit of measuring going on. You do need to make sure when you fit the mirror, it fits loosely. And then when you tighten, when you've got it at that distance, you then, on the right-hand side, you can see some nuts, and you just tighten those, loosen those with, in fact, they're screws. You loosen the screws, you pull the cord tight, and then you tighten it. And that gives the mirror enough place so it doesn't touch those poles, and it's got enough space to expand and contract without interfering, right? So you need to make sure you get that distance as it specifies in the manual correct as well. So temporarily, I put the lid the wrong way up just to cover the mirror whilst it was sitting in the kitchen, and whilst I was working out what the manual said next. But you can see now that I've fitted the mirror in the rocker, and then I've put that rocker on the turning base. And there are some useful stickers on the side, which then tell you how to align things later on, which is quite handy. This is me fitting the secondary. So, and by the way, I take you all through this because it was actually a delight in doing this. And this is an unusual, because it's so big, it's an unusual event. It does take a while to do this the first time out, right? And it was quite nice unboxing such a load of boxes of goodies to them for just one product, because normally you undo one thing, right? And then that's it. Well, this is literally quite a lot of boxes to go through. So I fitted that secondary up onto the spider vanes, and that must sit about a foot off the ground at that point, with the actual holder itself sitting on the floor of the kitchen, as you can see there. Was a bit worried, thinking, oh, I don't want that to fall on the floor, but no, it's quite well. As long as you do up the nuts, it's quite well held in. Next thing to do, because I'm still doing this in the kitchen, I'm starting to fit the poles. This was one of the unique poles. In fact, there are 2 poles on either side, so there are 8 poles in total, and they're connected in pairs. So you only got 4 pairs of poles, and one of them has this connector, and you'll see the difference in a minute, but it means it goes by this bar that runs across the back of the mirror. So that's how you know it goes in there, and it has to be fitted that way, otherwise it'd be quite difficult to screw it up. and this is the other type of connector that we have, right? On the other end. So here we go. So now, so I'll put the two pairs together, and you can see the one on the left is the one that we fit in the special place, and it's got these, again, these bits of tape just to make sure. If you didn't spot, I mean, I just thought, how did you not know that? If you didn't spot that those were different at the bottom, at least the tape would know, right? But then they said, actually, if you're doing this in the dark, you might want to just see the bits of tape because they're luminous, and therefore, you know, you'll go, oh, they're the ones inside my socks that when I take socks off, you go, they're the ones I want, rather than fiddling about trying to look at the ends. There was one small problem, and this was the small problem I did have. Again, Bob to the rescue in terms of knowledge here. So they'd misthreaded one of the screws that went in and held one of these poles on. Fortunately, I had, just so happens, unbelievable, I've only got one tap and die that is imperial, and it was the right one for this, because Bob had been making me use the right one for other things that we were using, and it just so happens the only thing I've had shipped from the US, and it takes the same tap and die, right? So I recut with the tap that hole, and then that thread then went in perfectly, right? So I was quite pleased with my my little bit of engineering. I can see Jim sitting in sort of with all his engineering stuff behind him, but you know, for me, I don't do a lot, so I was quite pleased with that bit of engineering there. So I've got all the poles erected, and I've stood on the little white stool, and I've put this on the top with the secondary, and then I straightened it up and gorged a hole in my ceiling because I didn't realize how tall it was, and it's got this thread sticking in the top. You can just see how close that is to the ceiling, hopefully. And yeah, anyway, that was a little bit of paint just to paint over that, and didn't mention that to anyone else. But yeah, essentially erected it in there, and you can start to see it taking shape, but there's still quite a bit to go. That was how close it was before it would hit, so I decided not to move it back any further from doing that. Another key piece of equipment is this bar. So you can see on the left-hand picture there are two metal pieces of metal there. There's one that says 22DD. That's all. You fit that to the scope, and that one goes alongside a piece of tape with a line on it, so you can get it straight. And then that stays on there forever. And the one on the right-hand side is the one you take off, and you can see on the right-hand picture, it's got two little brass screws, and you just loosen those. And then right at the very top on the left-hand picture, there's actually a little plastic grub, and you unloosen that, and that whole pole comes off. And that is the encoder, right, that sits on behind that, the encoder for the telescope. There's another one underneath that obviously does altitude, and the azimuth is done on an encoder you can't see buried in the box below. So to be able to get the wheelbarrow handles on and off this beast, you need to take that piece of metal off every night, right? So that's the thing you need to remember. They do put a plate on the back of this. It's quite a big plate. Again, it's probably, you know, the size of my hand, and you get to say who you want to do it for. So I'm Dave, I'm a director, and I'm quite proud of being a made director at my company. So I called it Director Dave. So that's made especially for me. So that was my little treat. But it's just a nice fancy plate that sits on the back. And again, you know, it's got, it hasn't got the serial number, but it's got the number off the truck, as it were. So this is number 705, right, of this. So, which is really good. And you can see the Obsession Telescope's very nice patch that's on the right-hand side as well. It's the small things that count. So this is it now in my kitchen. I have a very lovely wife who doesn't mind having it in the kitchen for a few days when it was put there. And you can see now I've got the Argo Navis on top, and you can also see I've got that shroud. And the reason you have the shroud in the right place is because when you get up and close and personal with the Argo Navis, there is actually a nice hole inside of the shroud itself, which has then been machined round so it doesn't fray, which the Argo Navis has a clip to clip onto one of the poles, and it doesn't want to do it over the shroud and ruin it, so it goes through the hole that's in there purposely, and that's how you know you've got it the right way around. The other reason is obviously the right hand end at the top of the scope is narrower than the bottom hand end that goes over the bottom piece of the scope. So this was first light that very evening, and I went out with my daughter's boyfriend who lives with us, Luke, who helped me build everything in my garden. So there we were on the not quite finished patio area, the observing patio area, and you can see all the building stuff still around us where my builder hadn't finished. And we were just out, and it was partially cloudy, to be honest with you. In fact, probably 90% cloudy, and we were trying to just focus on a star somewhere and make sure it was we could just see something and we'd fitted it all together correctly. So that was the first night out. Very shortly after that, this happened. So you've got to remember, this is back in November. I did this. I broke my foot. I didn't drop the mirror on it or anything else, before you ask. I fell off one of the new steps that had been put into the garden going up to the warm room that I'm sitting in at the moment, and broke my foot. Now, my foot was like that for another 3 months, right? So in that time, with my foot broken, I really didn't get around to using the telescope, and I was busily trying to hobble about with my boot, fixing the remainder of the buildings that needed to go up, including the workshop where this this telescope was going to be housed. So roll on, in fact, almost to the day 4 months later, and this is Luke now out with the telescope on. The builder's finished, the observing pad's done, and the home of the telescope is in place. You can see that behind. That's the small workshop that I had put in, and it's just big enough when you take that down, you can put it in one of the corners just as you walk in the door. And the wheelbarrow handles allow me to, once that's stripped back down, wheel it nicely through a double set of doors, and it just fits through the double set of doors, right? So I'm not taking it up and down steps. It doesn't go very far, but we've got a nice big observing pad on which to put this on. There's always something else to buy. So there was me thinking, well, the expense of the Obsession telescope was quite enough. But I went off to the Practical Astronomy show last weekend with some of the people on the call. And I decided now was the time to go and buy a couple of atlases. So an atlas and a sky guide that could be used outside. Now I have sitting down here the Norton Sky Atlas, which I love, but it's quite big and it's paper-based and it's A3. And it wouldn't last 5 minutes outside with the dewy weather. These Stellarium guides are brilliant because they're almost a bit plasticky, which means I can take them outside in the dew and they won't get ruined, right? And they've got really good reviews. And they're very, very detailed, and they're actually for people who want to do deep sky observing with big dogs. So the Atlas allows me to look and see what is in what constellation. The Deep Sky Guide then allows me to look at inside and say, well, actually, what does that object look like, both through one of the telescope plates from one of the observatories in the US, but also from a drawing somebody's done, right? So there are literally thousands of images inside of these guides, so it's really good. And here's just an extract from, I was sitting in my wife's building the other day in the summer house, and I was just sitting there with my feet up, reading what I'm going to go and have a look at with the telescope when I went out and started hunting around Orion. So when you wheel it out onto the pad, the first thing is obviously the mirror cell itself and on the rocker never comes off the base. So you've wheeled it out. I've disconnected the wheelbarrow handles. I don't have a picture here, actually, I'm afraid, of what it looks like, but you can see a couple of chains at the bottom there that have been secured in place. There are some at the back and some at the front, and that just makes sure that that mirror with a rocker, when you pick up with the wheelbarrow handles the whole telescope, it doesn't fall off, right? So if you weren't to secure it with those little chains, it would literally come off the bottom box. So you do need the chains on there. So the first thing I do is then go around and unhook the 4 of those chains. And that's what she looks like in position, which is good. And you can see my double doors behind for where I've just wheeled it out, and I've closed one of the doors up to try and keep the heat in there. and I've put this on the observing pad. And now I'm just going to show you what it looks like to build it. So this is, you can see the wheelbarrow handles behind. So the first thing you do is put first strut in, and you screw that in from the bottom. And I can do this by myself now, and this takes about 15 minutes, right, doing it carefully. And I go back into the workshop and I bring out the next pole. I fit that. I fit the next pole after that. And that one's got, you can see at the top, some blue tape holding some weights. And those weights are tubes, empty tubes that you fill with sand. Fortunately for me, I had a lot of sand around because I was having lots of building done. I probably had more concreting done than most people will have, given the, I now think, 38 tons of material that went up the garden by hand. And some of that sand went into the weight. So I thought I was quite pleased about that. So that's the front one, because it's going to, when you tip it, turn to the right. Then you put the back one on. And now you do the scary bit, right? You fit the top section on, right? And you do that by holding it above, clearly on a step ladder, which I think I've got here. Here's my little step ladder, which now just permanently sits outside for this use. So I get on that step ladder and I just hold it over the top and I balance it on one of the threads. And then with my other hand, hold, I've still got hold of it. And then with my other hand, I start screwing one of the threads. Then I screw the second thread. Then I let go and I screw the third thread. Then I get down the ladder, go around the back and screw the fourth thread in. And it's fine. It's not going to go anywhere. And fortunately for me, there's a cover over the mirror as well. With a scary bit over, I can now put the shroud on, and to do that, you actually lean it down and thread the shroud on itself. And then it's got some nice bungee sort of ties at the bottom, which are stretchy, which you then hook over the knobs, the sort of threads that you've been holding the poles on to the base with. With that done, the next thing you do is you put the laser in. So here's the laser collimator. It's a 2-inch laser collimator, a red one. And it's fairly straightforward. Again, it's like all these things. Once you learn how to do it, it takes you a couple of minutes, right? So I can literally now put that in, do the minor adjustment on the secondary, because typically it hasn't moved, right? And then a very, very minor adjustment on the primary, right? And that's the order you do it in. And that literally takes me a couple of minutes, and he's very good, very accurate, and hasn't caused me any problems. I then go and fit the Argo Navis, which now has the wires permanently connected to the base, so I don't have to go fiddling about with clips. And that's where it sits, and it's a wonderful little device. I quite enjoy using that. As I said, without it, Bob and I were struggling. When I put this on, and Luke came out with me the other night, apart from the hour and a half it took me to work out how to use it, then I read the manual. And when I read the manual, it took me 2 minutes to use it. And we went, all right, actually, if I read the instructions and follow those instructions, actually, it works, right? And you literally just point it at a star, say, I'm pointing at Betelgeuse on the list, enter, point it. In this case, I then went to Sirius, went, I'm pointing at Sirius, enter, done. It is now synced. And you can then go to the catalog and go, I want to go to back to Betelgeuse, right? And it'll go, fine. Now push the telescope until both numbers, altitude and azimuth, are 0. And it'll tell you which direction with a little arrow to push it in. And as you push it, it's changing. So it's absolutely a dream to use. And you can do all this from the ground. Get to 0, look through the eyepiece, it's in the center. Nice and easy, right? So any faint fuzzies, no star hopping, much better to use. And I did ask the more long in the tooth people about doing this for visual, and they went, I said, I thought it was all about star hopping. That's the great way to, that's proper astronomy. And they went, no, you'll waste years of your life. Don't do that. You put this on there, you'll get much more use out of the telescope, much more pleasurable. Telrad goes on there for the initial alignment. So that's always useful. Once you've used it to align on the 2 stars, I turn it off. I don't use it again. And then I'm sort of ready to go, and I leave it like that. Later on, I will come out and I will take the laser collimator off, and I will put this on. So this is the paracore, and this is, remember, the one that allows us to get and make sure that you don't get any problems with coma. So there is this setting, and you can see A, B, C, D, and then below it, just to the top, E, F, G, and H go around. And the idea is there is a table, which I've now got permanently on my phone, and it says, if you've got this type of eyepiece, you need to set it to this. If you've got that type of eyepiece, you set it to that. For the two eyepieces I've been using thus far, which is the 13mm ethos and the and a 31mm Nagler, then actually one is A and one is H. So it's it's actually either all the way in or all the way out. So I can remember that. I can remember two things. I think I'm quite good at that. This is the 31mm Nagler. Now, for those of you who are smart enough to spot, I didn't say I bought a 31mm Nagler. I said I bought a 13mm ethos, which is absolutely true. That is what I shipped from the US and bought it into the country, which was possibly not the cheapest way of doing it, even at the dollar rate. But whilst I was up at the show last week at PAS, and I was buying those star guides and some other bits and pieces, I also bought this, and this is Owen Brazel's 31mm Nagler that he said, my eyes just aren't good enough anymore to use this. You need a younger set of eyes. So if you want it, you can buy it at half the price that I paid for it, right? Which is actually a bit of a steal for a Nagler. So instead of paying 670, 680 quid, I paid 350, and I was quite pleased with that because Owen's a good guy and he's looked after it, which is splendid. So that now sits on there on the end, and I was quite happy. The other thing that you then need to do is make sure that before you do any alignment in the evening is, and I said about that 2-star alignment, the one thing you do before you turn on the Argo Navis is you have to set it directly at 90 degrees, so up to zenith. And neatly, they've given you 2 bits of permanent tape. And if you see, I can't use my mouse on this, but if you see to the right of the handle, there is a very thin white strip that goes sort of upwards towards 11 o'clock. And that's in 2 pieces. So as you rotate the telescope on its altitude, those lines don't meet up until they do. And when they do, you're at 90 degrees. So it's a really neat thing. He said, it was only a few years ago they decided to do that because people thought they were at 90 degrees, but actually weren't at 90 degrees. So a simple, very simple fix, right? To a problem that you might have. The other additional thing on night 2 that I used was I dug out some matting that was in the old workshop, some rubber matting, and I decided to put it around the telescope because what I found was whilst I'm fitting the telescope together, I'm down on my knees on the concrete trying to screw things in and fit the bungees for the shroud, so that's quite handy. And it saves my poor slightly old knees now, but it also means if I'm taking an eyepiece out and I drop it, and I'll probably have to extend this pad out just a bit, then hopefully I will, because it's obviously longer than that, I'll drop it on that rather than drop it on the concrete, which I'm sure I will not be happy about doing for any of my eyepieces. And the final couple of shots here, this is just what it looks like when you look down the end of the telescope. So you can see the mirror and then the reflection of the secondary and the spider, and then you can see the dot on the mirror down the bottom. And if I just step back a bit, you can start to see the spider sits, and you can see I think the nice, feature just at the top, just where it says 22-inch f4, just in case I get so old and people ask me and I can't remember what f ratio the telescope is, right? Or it's so late in the night, and we all know your IQ drops, right, by the square root every time, every hour that you're up, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, I can't remember what it is. So it's written on the top there. And then final picture, this is how I leave it. I then walk indoors, and then I come back out when it's dark and it's all ready to use. And that little box on the left-hand side by my little wall there just contains all of the bits that go on top of the telescope. So like the eyepiece, like the laser collimator, like the tail rad and the Argo Navis. So it's all in a nice, really useful box, just stored next to the telescope in the workshop as well. Final slide. I think this is the final one. what do you see through it? So I've looked through this a few times. I would say genuinely, this picture is around about right. Okay, so I've got a 6-inch Dob sitting here, which I took out and put next to it, and then went off and looked at a glob, and it does look rather faint and small, right? You look through my 22-inch, and it is superbly bright and big. It is amazing the difference it makes, that light capture. And to be fair, if I think back to the days, and Bob will remember this for sure, when we used the 24mm panoptic on the 16-inch back in 2005, 2006, the view we got of M13 was spectacular compared to using it on a tiny Dob, right? Just because of the light gathering ability. So, you know, if nothing else, the ability to gather all those photons and then redirect them into your eye does make it a lot brighter, right? Which is one of the reasons you don't go looking at a full moon with one of these scopes. I have hunted around the night sky with a handful of objects on a couple of nights so far, because I've been imaging from the observatory at the same time because we've had this beautiful weather. And I must say, I'm actually really delighted with this over and above, you know, a 12-inch Dob that I've used. And I'm actually really pleased I bought it, right? Because you do sit there going, I've just spent a lot of money. I hope this is going to be all right. But I can hand on heart say, I can start to see features in M42, you know, and other faint fuzzies, NGC objects that and PGCs that I could not see before with this. So if you're not interested in visual and hunting out faint fuzzies, this is a lot of money to spend on a Dobsonian telescope, right? Don't go do it. Don't go do it. Just don't. But actually, if you are interested in doing that, and I'm hoping to get decades of use out of this now, then compared to other telescopes, I'm really pleased with the quality of what I bought from Obsession in the US. So that's the end of my little presentation. Any questions?
Excellent, Dave. Thanks very much for that interesting journey. And of course, some of us will recall seeing the Swan Nebula from La Palma, where we ran. Was that a 12-inch Dob? I can't remember. But,
that was the 12, yeah.
Yeah, that was spectacular. Then, of course, we had the experience with the 20-inch at the Parador on Tenerife.
24.
Oh, it's 24. Yeah.
Got that. So even bigger. And that was wonderful, wasn't it? When we were looking through that at the top of the mountain, that's a different experience again.
Dave, did you have to clean the mirrors at all?
No, all been cleaned before they were all packaged away. The dust you see on one of the photos is literally the dust falling on it as I've opened it, and then there's dust in the kitchen, like in any room. But no, I didn't have to clean it at all. No. Spotless.
Dave, when you put the eyepiece adjuster in that has the A through H, what is it you're then? Yeah, what is it you're then adjusting?
So you're adjusting the distance of which the eyepiece sits away from a corrector. So the eyepiece then sits away from the secondary, which is great because it's moving the eyepiece out, but it's also got a lump of glass in the paracore to correct.
Oh, right. So that stays in there.
So that stays in there. So when you put the paracore in, you're adding almost like a coma corrector to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Then you've got an adjustment which allows you for a given eyepiece to move the eyepiece in and out compared to where the corrector now sits.
Yeah. And then you've got your appropriate focal range. Yeah. Okay.
And it's actually useful on, you know, as I say, any telescope where you're going to be changing the optics. And it's shorter than or faster than f4.5, it's recommended you have something like a paracord, which is what I tell you to do. Fast telescopes, right? Without the fast telescopes, you don't need it.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
In case people didn't notice, but Dave did do the conversion for the weight of the mirror. 31.37 kilograms.
That's why I can't lift it by myself. Yeah, it's a tad heavy. Yeah, that's why it's now parked down at the workshop from down literally down the hill from where I just because I'm not by myself, even wheeling that up a hill or back to where this room is. It's going to stay down there at the observing pad and just come in and out, right? And then the wheelbarrow handles, I can do that by myself. But if I wanted to pick it up and move it, that's a 2-person lift.
Any more questions for Dave? If not, shall we show our appreciation in the normal way? Yeah.
You're welcome. And of course, I will, like any good astronomer, be having a first light party at some point. So now that the observatory's in, all the buildings are in, as some of you know, because some of you have been over when I was getting it built, and now I've got the Dobsonian. I will run an evening where I invite everyone over. So hopefully we'll get a clear night, and then you can come and have a look through at some of the objects and see what it can do.
Excellent. Thanks once again, Dave. I shall stop the recording now.